Awesome. Well, I'll start by saying thank you all for coming out today. I thought the very first panel that there was very great conversation. And so kind of to start, when I first came to the Observer in August, my editor at the time had mentioned doing a mobile newsroom and focusing on Hidden Valley. And the reason behind that was we wanted to see, what are the challenges facing that neighborhood and how do they, in some ways, represent a microcosm of what's being seen today across Charlotte. To begin, I would love to start with you, Ms. Marjorie. Can you talk a bit about, some of the key issues that you see facing Hidden Valley as a community today?
Good afternoon, good morning again. I've lived in Hidden Valley for 45 years. And what our greatest challenge right now is revaluation and taxes. That's our biggest concern. When we moved into Hidden Valley, it was a middle-class neighborhood, and we have a lot of different people who work for the government, teaching and that sort of thing. So their income is too high to qualify for any assistance with taxes and with staying in place. And so as our property taxes went up $100,000 this year. So as the revaluation occurs, it's going to put a lot of people who are just like me in a predicament of where we are not going to be able to afford to live in Hidden Valley. So the first thing with us is that's a concern for those residents, revaluation and taxes for the seniors. The second thing that we have going on there is we have developers who have brought up properties, and the rent is very expensive. The house next door to me rents for $2,000 a month. There are several homes on Log Cabin that haven't rented, 7 of them out of the 11 in the last couple of years. They rent for $2,000 a month. With that kind of rent, what they're doing is forcing multiple families in one house. And the city, they don't know, they need the garbage, the cans to accommodate that. If you have 15, 20 people living in a house, you have to have the help from the city for your trash collection and different code enforcement issues. So that's another set of the problem. Now, we can look at gentrification on 2 levels. For those seniors who get priced out of their homes, not being able to afford to stay in place, but not being able to qualify for any assistance, and also not being able to pay taxes, say, on a $500,000 property, which would equal $5,000 a year. That's going to be something that we really have to consider. And the second thing, when the LLCs reach the point of where they do want to sell, is going to put the renters out, and so we'll see gentrification from both angles. So those are our top concerns. We have a lot of other concerns. Those are the ones that I'm going to focus on today. Thank you.
And Ishmael, I kind of wanted to ask you, when you talk about, or Ms. Marjorie rather talks about, revaluations and people's property taxes going up. Can you talk a bit about how that plays out even across Charlotte beyond just Hidden Valley?
Right. So again, it's great to be here. My name is Ishmael with the Charlotte Housing Justice Coalition. I'm also originally from Charlotte. I currently live in Clinton Park. That's another historically African American neighborhood since the late 60s, early 70s after white flight. So I think that when we have this conversation, we always have to frame it in reference to where we are and how we got to where we are. There is the long-standing legacy, of course, in Charlotte of simultaneously of segregation and also the very intentional divestment from African-American neighborhoods and communities. And so, when we look at my neighborhood, when we look at Hidden Valley, things are the way they are now because the land in a lot of these neighborhoods is cheaper compared to other parts of Charlotte because of the long legacy of divestment, because of urban renewal and the fact that federal funds didn't flow into neighborhoods to improve things. And so now we're kind of at a point where, there's basically a mad grab for land, right? And this is very much a part of the type of capitalist accumulation we have in our society. And these are policy choices, and I would even say moral choices that we made about who should live where and who can afford to live in the city ultimately. So to that point, and I think I want to let Alicia talk a little bit more about the property tax evaluation. That's what focusing on the senior neighborhoods is part of her work. But I would say that, even for my house, our property taxes went up like 130, 140%. Right, in this last evaluation. And so, it's just, we're looking at displacement on all fronts because, as was mentioned, a lot of African-American neighborhoods both have a lot of renters, particularly there are a lot of people that have housing vouchers as well that traditionally could live in these neighborhoods in the Crescent. And so that's, this is a possibility that increasingly is just untenable for more and more people, both because of the tax evaluations and because of the rise in rents. And we also know that there are interest rate hikes that have happened as well. And following the financial crisis, we had an environment where there was very low interest borrowing. It basically was a free money giveaway to large corporations, real estate interests, developers, so on and so forth. And now the chickens are coming home to roost, but it's not those entities that are paying the price. It's ordinary homeowners, middle class people, and working class people that are paying the price for that. So I just really want to frame this conversation in the social, political, and economic reality in which we live, and also think about bottom-up, community-driven solutions and approaches, which I think was touched on in the last panel. But I'll pass it to Alicia. Well, I'll let her get it.
I'm sorry. Well, I was going to ask Alicia for you to add a bit about, again, we talk about seniors now. We talk about property evaluations going up and how that impacts them in the neighborhood.
Sure. Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me. So when we're talking about senior citizens, we're talking about individuals who are retired, right? Folks who are no longer working, and so therefore they are on set incomes, right? Fixed incomes. And many of the seniors we serve through For the Struggle, the only form of income they receive every month is Social Security income, right? So when you think about, the drastic rise in property values, and, Ishmael talked about the evaluations. I too live in a historically black community here in Charlotte. I live in University Park, right behind West Charlotte High School. And my property taxes, my property evaluation is going out of the roof, right? And so that's okay for someone like me, a young, able-bodied human who, if I needed to, by the grace of God, I could go and get an extra job to cover, whatever my basic needs are, but our senior citizens can't. And so, we're seeing this drastic rise in property value, but we're not seeing any action. We're not seeing enough action being taken to ensure that the people who are disproportionately impacted by this rise is protected in literally every way that we possibly can, right? Ishmael touched on, the developers and some of the breaks that they've received historically, and he's given a really phenomenal background into why we have gotten here. And I think it's also important to recognize, it's important for us to recognize the role that our leaders have played in us getting to this position as well, right? We're talking about, elected officials, we're talking about organizational leaders, we're talking about corporate leaders, right? And I think it begs the question, if we really get into the nitty-gritty, so to speak, as my grandmother loves to say, into the nitty-gritty of how we got here, and we have honest and open communications and discussions about how we got here, I think that's the only way to really put us on a real path to figuring out meaningful solutions, right? So I won't go too deep into that. You can take from it And so one of the things Ms. Marjorie touched on that I also want to talk about very briefly as well are different, policies and actions that are currently being taken by some of our governmental entities that are also worsening the issue of gentrification, especially as it pertains to our senior citizens, right? There's been like a call for heightened code enforcement, right, to beautify or to clean up certain neighborhoods throughout the city. And the reality is that those cleanup efforts are our historically Black communities, right? They want them to be cleaned up, which is a good thing on its surface, right? But when you are becoming 10 times more aggressive with code enforcement, what we're seeing from a practical perspective is, senior citizens being cited because their grass is too high. Well, how is a 90-year-old senior going to get out there and cut their grass? How can we work with organizations on the ground? I have a youth program. I would gladly send my kids out there to go and cut. I look for things, for them to do that's productive for them to do, right? So everything from citations from an old car being in the front yard, or the grass being too high, or a roof being, dilapidated, or the home looking dilapidated, whatever it may be, right? How can we really make sure that we have meaningful relationships and partnerships in place so that when a senior citizen or a citizen's home and they do see these things, there should be a meaningful connection where they can call the Fort Struggles of the world, or even maybe even the Habitat of Humanities for the world, or the Rebuilding Charlottes of the world, and say, hey, we got a senior citizen who's struggling with X, Y, and Z. Before we issue them this code violation that we know they can't pay, that ultimately could potentially lead to them losing their home, what can you do to help that senior citizen, right? And so for us, we are always exploring practical ways to be able to make those meaningful relationships to make sure we're combating displacement.
And on the subject of displacement, one of the things, Ms. Marjorie, that you touched on earlier was the topic of the investors and developers buying homes in a lot of these neighborhoods. And on the subject of Hidden Valley in particular, again, when we started our efforts with the Charlotte Observer to do a local newsroom, we wanted to look at Hidden Valley in particular because we did see it as a microcosm of the rapid growth that's happening around Charlotte. And for one example, we did a study last year, or rather an investigative report, that showed 12% of the homes across Mecklenburg County were owned by investors. In Hidden Valley, it was 18%, which was the highest we ever saw. And one of the things I wanted to ask you, Ms. Marjorie, just in your history of being in Hidden Valley, is how do you think that impacts the neighborhood when it goes from homeowners to investors?
It does impact the neighborhood greatly when you live in your home, you're more apt to take more care of it. Now, there are some, I had a renter that lived across the street from me. He lived there for 14 years. He was the best renter. He changed the windows out in the house. He added to that. And I kept saying, Dave, you don't do all of that for somebody else's home. I was disappointed because he asked the guy if he was selling the home. 14 years, best tenant, fixed up the home. No. So he's moved. Yes, that's the way I felt. So then you have the other renter who don't care. You know, it could be, we have things like where it affects our safety. Sitting on the porch on a Tuesday last week, 75-year-old lady should not be bombarded at 11 o'clock because police is chasing somebody from Sugar Creek Road and they running through her backyard. All she wanted to do was sit there and live peacefully at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. And then when you talk to and it's taken an act of Congress for me to just get a list of the LLCs for Hidden Valley. I've called the county. No, we don't have a list of them. We have to go door by door, put in the address. People are taking off their house numbers text them and try to figure out who is this, a homeowner or is this a LLC? Well, if you're going to be an LLC, you need to keep up with your property. When we talk to the LLC, it's like, well, I can't put them out. Well, somebody is shooting at night. Somebody is letting a pit bull out while the seniors are trying to do their yard work. All she wants to do is plant some flowers. And he lets this pit bull out because he's angry that his girlfriend came over there and asked him to help her because he was beating her. This is the kind of things that we are dealing with in Hidden Valley. And we're not going down without a fight. Now, I've reached out as a president, and I've gotten a pro bono attorney because we do have deed restrictions, and they do, they renew them every 10 years. So it's not old deed restrictions back in the corner. So for some of these people, when we have these things, we're going to start turning them in, not only to code enforcement, but also to the attorney to see what we can do about that, because this is unfair for us to have to go through this for you being an absent landlord. The other thing that Alicia said that I really agree with, before we, and I hope code enforcement have this in their process, before they cite people, they do need to find out who's in the home. Is this a 90-year-old person that can't even walk from room to room, and you're saying cut the grass? Now, we in Hidden Valley, we have a committee and we have a code enforcement liaison who works with code enforcement. And I tell them, make sure that we find out who we're turning in before we turn them in. So that is a very good point.
Well, maybe you can connect me with your liaison, because I tried to get one out.
Well, not if this liaison lives in Hidden Valley. They are the code enforcement. We have committees in the Hidden Valley Community Association. So she works closely with the code enforcement folks, from the supervisor to the manager to the field representative. But yes, it's affecting us in terms of your question. To answer your question, it's from crime, it's from code enforcement violations, it's from, do you know how many people living in your house? Do you know that it might be a subleasing situation? I talked to the social worker from Atrium Health. She said that for the Latino population, they are renting a room for $1,000 for the whole family. So we have some deep issues with the LLCs. Not all of them. I'm not saying that all of them, but there are issues.
One of the things I also wanted to note is that a significant enough percentage of senior citizens, particularly in the Betty-Fort Rural Corridor, have been long-term renters. They've been renting the investors who own these homes. What we've seen on the ground is that it's kind of like a catch-22, right? Because I can take it outside of Royal Struggle and into my law firm, I'm an attorney by trade, and send a demand letter that they do certain upgrades to make them home more habitable. But then the catch-22 of the situation is, they'll come back and say, okay, we'll make this repair, but then we're going to turn around and raise the rent, right? We know that senior citizen can't afford, that rent. So it's a very frustrating, quite frankly, process of trying to address that issue, because we do have a significant portion of our senior population who are long-term renters.
And also to add to that, so the majority of my practice is actually representing tenants that face eviction. Not only that face eviction, but also I very aggressively go after derelict landlords that fail to do repairs, that often street tenants and often charge tenants fees that don't exist in the lease. What I can say, both from a community organizing standpoint and a legal standpoint, is that the business model of a lot of these corporate LLCs that have bought property across Charlotte, across Mecklenburg County, is exactly that. It's to be absentee. It's to not do repairs. It's to collect as much rent as possible. It is to not be engaged or involved in neighborhoods or communities. And this creates an inherently disruptive process, right, that is resulting in gentrification and rents rising. Our organizing principle for the Housing Justice Coalition is housing is a human right. Everybody has a right to housing regardless of their ability to pay for it. That's our principle, and that's what we stick to. And so, African American communities, particularly, like Alicia said, are caught in this catch-22, whereby, you have crime in your neighborhood, or you have, from the years of divestment, so on and so forth, right? But the proposed solution really is a type of nuisance. You were facing displacement on one side, and then you're facing not having the same amenities and not having the same access to maybe city services or just being in a food desert or something like that on the other side. And our communities are really kind of smashed in between these really poor outcomes. And, our approach, of course, for Housing Justice Coalition is to combine education, advocacy, and community organizing, again, for communities to, especially particularly, put pressure on the city in terms of where the city spends its dollars, how the city spends its dollars, what subsidies the city chooses to give to developers, and we would like to see the city provide a lot more direct support for cooperative housing, for neighborhood groups, for community groups, and for particularly, I know we'll get to it, the motel that was sold, right? I think that's a chance for there to be a community-oriented solution, because that impacts residents of Hidden Valley. So, again, this goes back to the broader question about who has a right to live where and what policy and economic choices we've made about the type of society we want to have.
And one thing I wanted to touch on as well is we mentioned it several times, in this conversation, is the subject of gentrification and displacement. And, as a reporter myself, in doing stories about Hidden Valley, we're talking about the LLCs and the investors, and how they buy. The questions I even had for somebody who had been in this business longer than me is, well, how about that displacement? If they're selling their homes, isn't that what they want to do? I was hoping you all could talk a bit about how, when a LLC or an investor purchases a home, I think panelists from the previous panel touched on this, how that creates a system of displacement when these seniors are leaving, or when residents are leaving, or when they choose to sell their property or feel anymore. Also, you can kind of break it down a bit more.
It's not just the fact that they're selling the homes. It's, number one, how much are they selling the homes for? And number two, what kind of homes are they selling? And then number three, who are they selling their homes to? Right? So when we talk about, how much are they selling their homes for, every home that's sold for an amount that's disproportionately greater than the majority of the homes in the neighborhood, it has a ripple effect on the value of the other homes, right? And so when the property value increases, that automatically is going to increase the property taxes that are associated with that home, right? And so when I think of gentrification and displacement, I don't only think of the impact it has on the individuals in the community, but I also think of the impact that it has on the community as a whole, right? When you think about cities across the nation that are well known for gentrification, Harlem, parts of LA, parts of Atlanta, it's not necessarily that the homes are being sold off to other people. It's who are these homes being sold to, right? So I'll be quite frank, when it comes to historically predominant Black communities, what we're seeing is that, white folks aren't just moving into our communities, right? They're moving into our communities where you have all of these single family homes, beautiful brick homes, and we actually laugh about it when we canvass, because it's like, as we're canvassing, okay, hit that door, but when you see the house where the brick huge two-story, really skinny, tall type, two-story building that looks like it's supposed to be in San Francisco that clearly doesn't match the character of the neighborhood. That is an underlying issue with gentrification, right? And so when you're combating gentrification, you're not only combating displacement, but you're combating the erasure of history and culture, human justice, racial justice for so very long. So it's the preservation of the homes from an economic perspective, but also from a community perspective, right? So when we're on the ground of Bennettsville Road, it's just not just because we want to only keep Black folks there. I mean, yeah, we do, but we also want to make sure that we're preserving this history and culture. And what better way for us to do that than to make sure our historians, our senior citizens, can stay there to pass on that history and culture.
And I represent that population. Elderly folks that don't have wheels. That's a key part of this situation. You may have elderly folks where their children have passed away and they don't have wheels, and then they have a house. And then their niece or someone may come in from what to do with auntie's house. And so I'm just going to sell it to the person that's going to give me the quickest amount of money for the price. We have a lot of that going on. And so we're trying to, the Hidden Valley Community Association is trying to educate on wheels and how do you pass this on. And then you have people who, even with the wheels, you know that your son didn't quite make it in life. He's been doing the same thing for 40 years. You know something else is calling his name, and it's called addiction. And you leave it to him, and then you sell it to the first person that give him $50,000. So that's something that where we need more education around that. And you have to talk to your family about, have real conversations on that. So I just wanted to throw that part in, because that's how we're losing homes as well.
Sorry, I get excited. So, like I said, I'm a civil rights attorney by training, so we partner with a lot of pro bono attorneys. And one of the things we're pushing is not only to have a will, but to have a trust in place. When I do trusts outside of pro bono work for the struggle, I'm charging a minimum of $6,000 to $7,000 for that type of document. So we also see, Ms. Marjorie, a lot of that. It's not grandma and grandpa who's selling off their homes. It's when they transition and Pookie and Ray think $50,000 or $100,000 is not a lot of money, not thinking, okay, when you get that money and it runs out in 2 years, now where are you going to go? Because there's nowhere in Charlotte for you to rent for less than $1,300 a month, right? And so to protect against that, we actually advocate for families to put their homes in trusts, right? And generational trusts, right? So even if that young man was drunk on drugs and he wanted to
is how do residents, get in the driver's seat of the changes they see coming down the pipeline in their community, in their neighborhood, and how can they actively, have input on the neighborhoods, I guess you could say.
Yeah, so again, our approach is combining education, advocacy, and community organizing. So what that means is that a lot of the policies that contribute to and are driving these problems are policies that are enacted at the local level, at the county level, at the state level, and at the national level. So in order to be able to affect these policies, you need to have basically a base of power. You need to have the ability to impact what's passed. You need to be in the rooms when these conversations happen, and you need to have some kind of leverage, and that's really only built through a program of community organizing. So the example I would give for Housing Justice Coalition, specifically, it's relevant in this conversation because we work with the Howie Acres community, which is in very close proximity to Hidden Valley. In that particular instance, and I won't go into it too deep, there was a developer that owned several parcels of land in the community, several single-family homes, and the developer wanted wanted to basically rezone these parcels of land in order to build the types of big mansions that you see in what is now NODA. And the community, being concerned both about displacement and property taxes, was against it, but they wanted to know what they could actually do effectively. So, we worked with the community basically to, first of all, find out what people wanted to do. And we set up a meeting with the developer and a few representatives from the neighborhood, where people in the community directly expressed what they wanted and what they didn't want to the developer. From there, it escalated. We had some protests and actions in the community. But ultimately, we had a meeting with who was then the city council representative, where, we just packed the room. This was during the height of COVID, and you had seniors, you had other folks from the neighborhood come out and just directly express their opposition. In this particular case, it was a rezoning. So again, the rezoning goes back to that sort of public policy process, which kind of serves as a lever where the community can kind of insert its influence, right? So we see that, rezonings, the zoning situation is changing coming next month, but we see that for communities to sort of voice what they want, to basically influence what is built where in proximity to them or close to them. But long story short, this pressure resulted in the developer withdrawing their rezoning petition. And this is something that in Charlotte rarely happens, maybe outside of neighborhoods like Myers Park or Dilworth, or the sort of neighborhoods that have been historically the seat of power, in Charlotte. And so that's one thing. And then another thing I would say, through this process, I've talked about it before, we want to see community benefits agreements. We want to see communities negotiate directly with developers and being able to enter into agreements. And particularly in reference to a rezoning process, it's a public-private partnership. So that means that the city will play. We would like to see budgetary and other means of right to counsel so people can get representation if they face eviction. And we would like to see other development policies, but this is only going to come from neighborhoods and communities coming together at the grassroots and really pushing and advocating for this. And that comes through education and understanding.
I've been president of the Hidden Valley Community Association for 2 years. This is my second term. I was on the board for several years. But the one thing that when we started, our mission statement down, and it is AEEP. We advocate, we educate, we enhance, and promote a safe, well-maintained neighborhood for its residents. And the way we're doing that is we're increasing our membership. We're bringing in the education for our seniors. We also decided that we would allow people who didn't live in Hidden Valley to be what we call an associate member, friends of the valley. And then we started talking about all these other groups we need to work with. So we decided that, we want business partners to join our association. Now, before you become a business partner, we have a 10-member board. I know it's an even number. We're going to interview you and see if your goals are in line with our goals. Committee-based association where we have chairs. Everybody is running, there's somebody meeting right now, one of our community partners liaison at the McDonald's on Sugar Creek. And so this is working for us. And the one thing that I like to say, I started out at the county in the area of mental health. And I don't think God makes mistakes. And then from the area of mental health, I went to the city of the light rail system for cats. And then when I got out, my great work began. This when I left the job. And I said, there's for us to do. And there are a lot of people in the Bible that God called when they were old. Because I asked my son, I said, Mom, why is Mama having to do all this now? This is too much. And he said, Mama, read your Bible. There are a lot of old people that God did work. So we're just going to continue this journey. We're going to think positive with what we have in place. We're going to work with people sessions, and we're going to move forward. So I'm very optimistic about Hidden Valley at this point.
And Ms. Martin, that was so good, I forgot what I was about to say. Ishmael talked about collaborative community effort and, putting pressure on developers in different ways. One of the things we do at For the Struggle, we have an Eatman project that educating and engaging Black voters. I think one of the reasons why we historically see these types of things happen over and over to our communities is because we do not educate and engage ourselves with the electoral process. I think it's very important that we hold our elected officials accountable for the decisions they make, for the relationships they value, right? There's a very strong relationship between the developer, investment community, and our elected officials here in Charlotte. And that, making sure they're educated about how to get together and, work together, but also educated about their leaders and the role they are playing in this so that they know who they're voting for and why they're voting for that person.
And one of the things that I think Ishmael, you may have touched on, was, of course, recently City Council had approved the purchase of motels, I believe, near the Hidden Valley neighborhood to demolish them. And the question I had for you, Ms. Marjorie, is what would the Hidden Valley neighbors like to see placed there to improve that area?
Single-family townhomes affordable for sale with primary owners. That's a mouthful. But we want it won't be the second generation, my third, fourth generation, to have a home, a single-family house. If the seniors wanted to move and downsize, they could move to the single-family townhome affordable for sale. The reason we say primary owners, we want the people to live in the homes. We had Northway, one of the developers that I've worked with in Hidden Valley, built the log cabin homes. And Resi Home, rental company out of Atlanta, bought all 11 of them to rent. 7 are still unrented. So we had the homeless population decided, hey, these are nice homes. I ain't mad at them. They moved in. So now I'm trying to work with Resi Homes and say, drop the price on these homes. They're $2,000 to rent. Maybe bring it down to $1,400 or $1,500. You might get them rented with the family. That family is looking for homes. So yes, that's what we want with that property. I know it was a lot of controversy about that property. I did support it. I lived that crime. I saw that for decades. I saw what appeared to be sex trafficking. I saw all kind of things that my mind cannot unsee. If they said it had asbestos, I got a letter the other day to the guy that talked about the asbestos and how they're going to remedy that situation to make sure we were safe. And one of their reviewers said it wasn't fit for a stray dog. The reviewer said it, I didn't. And I think that it had to go. We had lived with it for decades. Some of the other motels that has families in it, I tell the Carter folks, don't touch it with those babies in it. There's one behind Family Dollar that has families in it. Don't touch it with the babies in it. And I said, I know because I see the school bus pulling up there. So there are other motels that Derida and Hidden Valley want to see. That was a poor plan on the city part to put that many motels. That was not lack of accountability. When your own police officers say my hands are tied, I don't want to see a cop with a gun telling me his hands are tied. I'm sorry, I'm old school. So it had to go. I too was angry about what we had to pay for it, see? But what were we going to do with So I would like to see single-family townhomes for sale that are affordable for primary owners.
On that subject issue, I was hoping you could either touch on, I guess, the delicate balance there that's going to have to be played when we talk about people who have, do not have a house and have to have been living there, and the very real concerns of residents in the Hidden Valley neighborhood, and how that's going to be balanced.
Yeah, so I appreciate that and the delicacy of the situation, because when I look at Hidden Valley and this particular motel, it's kind of a microcosm for the experience of a lot of African American neighborhoods across the country that are, where you have long-standing residents, right? There may be issues of crime and other things of that nature, but at the same time, it's people want to enjoy the benefits of living in a neighborhood and living in a community, but at the same time, a lot of these motels and places like that are a source of living in affordable housing, for those people who kind of don't live out in the open, may kind of exist in the informal economy, and from a human rights standpoint, those people have a right to housing also, right? And so it is, and I live in a neighborhood that's somewhat similar to Hidden Valley, so it's not. This is very difficult to balance. I would say that, in terms of getting something that is going to be beneficial and conducive not only to affordability and housing, but also to community and toward, I think, building a society that reflects the types of values that we want to see, I think there has to be a conversation, and there has to be a kind of a bottom-up sort of approach that involves all of the different people that are impacted, right? So again, practically what that looks like, the practical manifestation of that, I think, is the community coming together and creating a plan for what they would like to see, having different voices, but particularly obviously centering the voices of those who live in Hidden Valley, and saying this is what we want, and then putting that proposal directly to the city, putting that proposal, putting it out there, and really organizing around it to turn it into something that's not only going to work for the community, but is a result of people power. But, and I'll just be honest too, I think in the Black community, some of these conversations are generational, and we have some differences along generational lines, and so I think that there's a lot. I think we need to approach it with compassion. We need to approach it with understanding, but at the same time, I think we also have to be able to kind of express, how we feel and what we think, even if we disagree. But whatever happens in Hidden Valley and in other similar neighborhoods, the community needs to be putting forth what's going to happen there. And we need, and the city needs to heed that. And if the city won't heed that, or whomever else, then the community needs to make its voice heard. So I thought about this a lot, and I think that's the approach that I think would be beneficial.
I'm going to respectfully decline to comment.
One question I had, just in thinking to myself, and doing a lot of reporting on Hidden Valley or other neighborhoods. Often I talk to professors and, policy wonks and people who are, deep into that type of stuff. And the thing they commonly say to me is that, from you all, what is the difference between perhaps a gradual change in the neighborhood versus gentrification, and what do those differences look like?
Yeah, and I'm particularly never interested in what a scholar has to say, because this is real life, right? This is our study. This is people are really experiencing these issues. In terms of, there's a tremendous difference between a gradual change in a neighborhood and gentrification. Gentrification is very rapid. 1 year, so for instance, I'll give you a great example. I'll give you my own story. I purchased my home in 2018 on Bettisford Road. At that time, I'd like to run, so I'll run, up and down Ford, and I look around. I love being around Black people. I love my neighborhood, right? I love the homes. I love, the old folks sitting on the porch waving, hey, baby, I love my nosy neighbors because I travel a lot, so, older folks will watch your home for you for sure. And so all of this is happening. What I first moved in 2018. And thankfully, I can say that I would say my side of the corridor. And when I say my side of the corridor, I mean from 277 right past Johnson C. Smith up until I-85, right? I can say that I still see that when I'm running around that corridor. And I really do believe that it's because of the on-the-ground efforts of, like you said, educating our people. Hey, man, it's not worth selling your home. Like, let's think about this, right? Let's think about this when grandma or grandpa pass away. What does that look like for you in 5 years? Where are you going, right? Where are you going to live? And we have those very candid conversations with them. Is because we have their trust that they actually listen to what we're saying, right? So fast forward, you roughly see the same things. You don't see that anymore. I don't know how many of y'all have visited Johnson C. Smith lately, but if you look at the homes, that's surrounding, it's just not what it was. Even when I moved here, and I haven't even been here that long. Right? So that's what gentrification looks like. When we talk about the gradual change of a neighborhood, gradual change of a neighborhood doesn't necessarily mean you're changing the people in that neighborhood. Right? So if it's a historically black neighborhood, everything comes with change. There's obviously going to be change. We hope to see, improved infrastructure. We hope to see better sidewalks, better lighting, right? A wonderful new Westshore High School that we have built, right? We want to see those things. Those are all the great things that come with gradual change. But we have to be very careful about, how we're framing the narrative when we talk about positive change. Because again, positive change doesn't necessarily mean changing the people. It can just be growing that area, but also making sure, right, simultaneously making sure that the people who have lived there for decades can be a part of that change and not pushed out because of that change. That's the difference between gradual versus gentrification and displacement.